Today, we're diving into the mysterious world of Frankenstein's legacy. Get ready for a story of resurrection, reanimation, and an unexpected guest that'll leave you in shock. Let's find out who's this startling guest at Frankenstein's funeral.
No, you're hurting me! No!
Frankenstein, also known as the modern Prometheus, is a novel from 1818 by the English author Mary Shelley. It's all about Victor Frankenstein, this young scientist who does some wild science stuff and ends up creating a super smart creature. Mary Shelley was just 18 when she started writing the story, and it was published anonymously in London on January 1st, 1818, when she was 20. Her name only popped up in the second edition, which came out in Paris in 1821. So, Mary Shelley was on this Euro trip in 1815, cruising along the Rhine River in Germany and chilling near Frankenstein Castle. Yes, it's a real place. There, some alchemist dude was doing some crazy experiments a couple hundred years earlier. Then, she headed to Geneva, Switzerland, where most of the story goes down. Her gang, including her lover and future hubby, Percy Bysshe Shelley, was all into talking about galvanism and occult stuff. In 1816, Mary, Percy, John Polidori, and Lord Byron decided to have a horror story contest. After some deep thinking, Mary got her inspiration for Frankenstein, imagining a scientist who makes life and freaks out about it. So, even though Frankenstein has a bunch of gothic and romantic vibes going on, some dude named Brian Aldiss says it should be crowned as the OG science fiction story. He argues that unlike earlier stories with fantastical elements, where things just kind of happen, our main character in Frankenstein makes a conscious choice and goes all modern lab experimentally to achieve some mind-blowing results. This book isn't just some dusty old classic either. It's left its mark all over the place. It's basically the granddaddy of horror stories, movies, and plays. Oh, and here's a little fun fact. People tend to mix things up and call the monster Frankenstein instead of giving credit to his creator, Dr. Frankenstein. So, Victor starts by talking about his childhood. He was born in Naples, Italy, into a pretty well-off family from Geneva. Victor, along with his younger brothers, Ernst and William, are the kids of Alphonse Frankenstein and Caroline Buford. Right from when he was a kid, Victor had this burning curiosity to figure out how the world works. He was kind of obsessed with studying the old school ideas of alchemy, but as he grew older, he realized those ideas were seriously outdated. When Victor was just 5 years old, his parents decided to adopt Elizabeth Lavenza, who was the daughter of an Italian nobleman that lost everything. Interestingly, he ends up marrying Elizabeth later on. Oh, and his parents also took in another kid, Justine Moritz, who became William's nanny. Right before he heads off to the University of Ingolstadt in Germany, his mother tragically passes away from scarlet fever. To cope with the grief, Victor throws himself into his experiments. At the university, he becomes a real whiz kid at chemistry and other sciences, and he even comes up with this super secret method to bring non-living stuff to life. He decides to create a humanoid, but because it's pretty tough to make all those tiny human body parts, the creature turns out to be this giant, about 8 feet tall, and not exactly pretty. In fact, it's downright hideous, with creepy yellow eyes and skin that barely hides the muscles and veins underneath. Victor is totally freaked out by what he's made, so he hightails it out of there. While he's wandering the streets the next day, he bumps into his old friend, Henry Clerval, and he's too scared to let Henry see the monstrosity he's created. But when he goes back to his lab, the creature is gone. So, Victor gets really sick after all that craziness, and Clerval takes care of him. It takes him about 4 months to get back on his feet. Then, out of the blue, he gets a letter from his dad telling him that his little brother William has been murdered. When he gets back to Geneva, he spots the creature near the crime scene and is convinced that it's the one behind it all. They find William's locket with a tiny picture of Caroline in Justin Moritz's pocket, and she ends up getting blamed for the whole thing. Victor knows nobody will believe him if he tries to clear Justine's name, so she gets hanged. It's a total gut punch for Victor, and he's eaten up by guilt and sadness. He ends up retreating to the mountains. And just when he's hiking around Mont Blanc's Mer de Glace, out of nowhere, the creature shows up and begs Victor to listen to his side of the story. So Clerval goes with Victor to England, but they split up in Perth, Scotland, because Victor's convinced that the creature's tailing him. Victor's working on creating a female creature over in Orkney, but he's totally freaked out by this gut feeling that things are about to go south. He's worried that the female might hate the creature or turn out even worse. What's even scarier is the thought that making another creature could lead to a whole bunch of these monsters that could ruin humanity. So, he ditches the half-done female creature when he spots the creature, who has indeed followed him, peeking through a window. The creature bursts in and tries to intimidate Victor into working on the project again, but Victor refuses. The creature leaves, but not before giving a chilling threat. "I'll be there on your wedding night." Victor's thinking this means the creature will kill him once he's finally happy. So, Victor takes off on a boat to toss his gear into the sea. He falls asleep, the winds change, and he ends up on the Irish coast. But when he gets there, he's busted for Clerval's murder because the creature strangled him and left the body where Victor landed. Victor had another mental breakdown and wakes up in jail. But he's found to be innocent and heads back home with his dad, who's managed to get back some of Elizabeth's dad's fortune. Back in Geneva, Victor's all set to marry Elizabeth and is gearing up to take on the creature, arming himself with guns and a dagger. On the night after their wedding, Victor tells Elizabeth to stay put while he goes hunting for the Fiend. He searches the house and grounds, but the creature sneaks in and strangles Elizabeth. Victor sees the creature from the window, but the monster points at Elizabeth's lifeless body, taunting him. Victor tries to shoot him, but the creature gets away. Victor's dad, weakened by age and Elizabeth's death, dies a few days later. Driven by revenge, Victor chases the creature all across Europe and into Russia, but the monster keeps slipping away. The chase takes him all the way to the Arctic Ocean and towards the North Pole. Victor gets super close to the creature, like just a mile away, but he collapses from exhaustion in the freezing cold before he can catch him. The creature manages to escape. The ice around Victor's sled breaks, and he ends up on an ice floe that comes close to Walton's ship. Victor dies not long after, and in his final words, he advises Walton to aim for peace and contentment and steer clear of that ambition. Then, Walton finds the creature on his ship all bummed out beside Victor's body. The creature spills the beans, saying that Victor's death hasn't brought him any relief. In fact, his own bad deeds have made him even more miserable than Victor ever was. The creature makes a promise to set himself on fire on a funeral pyre so no one else has to deal with him. Walton watches as the creature drifts off on an ice raft, vanishing into the distance forever. The creature, who turns out to be pretty smart and good with his words, talks about his early days when he was just starting out in the wild. People were totally freaked out by his looks, which made him terrified and stayed away from him. He ends up living near this old cottage and takes a liking to the family that lives there. In secret, he helps them out by gathering firewood, shoveling snow, and doing chores for them. He listens to them talking and learns to speak. Plus, he teaches himself to read when he stumbles upon a bag of lost books in the woods. But one day, he spots his reflection in a pond and realizes he's as ugly as they come, just as terrifying to himself as he is to regular folks. As he gets to know the family better, he grows attached to them. Eventually, he tries to make friends with them and approaches the house when only the blind father is home. They have a chat, but when the rest of the family returns, they lose their minds and the creature has to run for it. The next day, they pack up and bail out of their home because they're too scared he might come back. The creature's pretty ticked off by how they treated him and gives up on ever fitting in with humans. Even though he despises his creator, he decides to travel to Geneva to find Victor, thinking Victor is the only one who owes him help. Along the way, he saves a kid who fell into a river, but the girl's dad, thinking the creature's up to no good, shoots him in the shoulder. That's when he decides to get back at all humans. He heads to Geneva, uses Victor's journal to get the details, and ends up killing William, making it look like Justine did it. Now the creature's got a demand for Victor. He wants a mate, just like him. He argues that since he's a living being, he deserves some happiness. He promises that he and his new companion will disappear into the South American wilderness and never bother anyone again if Victor goes along with it. But if Victor says no, the creature's ready to take revenge on Victor's friends and loved ones, and he won't stop until he's wrecked Victor's life. So, Victor, scared for his family, reluctantly agrees to the deal. The creature says he'll be keeping a close eye on Victor's progress. Shelley's writing was seriously shaped by her parents. Her dad was famous for his inquiry concerning political justice, and her mom made a name for herself with A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Shelley's dad's novels like Things as They Are or The Adventures of Caleb Williams, St. Leon, and Fleetwood also played a big role in her writing of Frankenstein. What's cool is that all these books had Switzerland as their backdrop, just like Frankenstein. Some of the big ideas about social connections and the whole rebirth of life thing in Shelley's novel come from these books she had. There are also other literary influences at play in Frankenstein, like Pygmalion at Galatea by de Genlis and the works of Ovid. These sources got Shelley thinking about people who see the issues in society, and Ovid's Prometheus tale even inspired the title of her book. You can see the impact of John Milton's Paradise Lost and Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner in the novel. It's like they make their mark all over it. In The Frankenstein of the French Revolution, Julia Douthwaite suggests that Shelley might have picked up some ideas for Frankenstein from Humphrey Davy's book, Elements of Chemical Philosophy. Davy talks about how science has given people the power to create and change things around them. The novel's got hints of the French Revolution woven into it, and one possible source is François Félix Nogaret's Les Miroirs des Invenimentos Actuels ou la Belle Applaus Offrande, a political story about scientific progress with an inventor named Frankenstein, who makes a life-size robot. What's cool is that both Frankenstein and the monster drop lines from Percy Shelley's 1816 poem, Mutability, and they dive into the whole subconscious thing in the story. Even though Percy Shelley wrote the poem, his name doesn't show up in the book's credits, unlike some other poets who got a shout-out. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is all about guilt, and William Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey is linked to innocence in the novel. Many writers and historians have tried to link some well-known natural philosophers, now called physical scientists, to Shelley's work because of some striking similarities. Two standout natural philosophers during Shelley's era were Giovanni Aldini, who made quite a spectacle in London with his attempts at human reanimation using bioelectric galvanism, and Johann Conrad Dippel, who was rumored to have developed methods to extend human lifespans through chemistry. While Shelley was aware of both these men and their endeavors, she didn't mention or reference them or their experiments in any of her published notes. The discussions about life and death that Percy and Byron had were also of keen interest to scientists of their time. They explored ideas from figures like Erasmus Darwin and the experiments of Luigi Galvani, not to mention James Lind. Mary joined in on these conversations, and you can see traces of the ideas of Darwin, Galvani, and perhaps Lind in her novel. Shelley's own life experiences played a big role in shaping the themes of Frankenstein. The novel explores themes like loss, guilt, and the repercussions of messing with nature, all of which drew inspiration from Mary Shelley's personal journey. Her mother's death, her complex relationship with her father, and the heartbreak of losing her first child are believed to have influenced the creation of the monster and his detachment from parental guidance. In a 1965 issue of the Journal of Religion and Health, a psychologist even suggested that Mary's feelings of guilt might have stemmed from not feeling worthy of Percy due to the loss of their child. In later works, the creature is often portrayed as a mishmash of body parts stitched together and brought to life through electricity, but that's not quite how Mary Shelley envisioned it. The whole electricity thing and the iconic image of Frankenstein's monster were largely popularized by James Whale's 1931 film adaptation and early movies based on the story. In Shelley's original work, Victor Frankenstein stumbles upon a mysterious life principle, and this revelation enables him to breathe life into a lifeless matter, though the specifics of this process remain deliberately vague. After some serious internal debate, Frankenstein painstakingly assembles the creature's body over 2 years, putting it together piece by piece from materials sourced from the dissecting room and slaughterhouse, and then brings it to life using his undisclosed method. One interesting aspect of Frankenstein's rejection of his creature is that he never bothers to give the poor guy a name. Instead, he refers to his creature using terms like wretch, monster, creature, demon, devil, fiend, and even it. When Frankenstein does have conversations with his creation, it's not exactly friendly banter. He calls him things like vile insect, abhorred monster, fiend, wretched devil, and abhorred devil. In the book, the creature gets compared to Adam, the first guy in the Garden of Eden. He also likens himself to the fallen angel. When he talks to Frankenstein, the monster drops this line, "I should have been your Adam, but I'm more like the fallen angel." The fallen angel is none other than Lucifer, the Lightbringer, from Milton's Paradise Lost, which the monster has actually read. Some folks have suggested that the creature could be seen as a blend of Percy Shelley and Thomas Paine. If you think about it, the creature's deep resentment towards Victor and his longing to nurture a child kind of reflects Percy's rebellious nature and his desire to adopt kids. His aspiration to do good and the suffering he faces might also be seen as echoing Paine's utopian dreams and his rough time in England. By the way, a common mix-up is that people often call the creature Frankenstein. Back in 1908, one author noted, "It's kind of weird how almost everyone misuses the term Frankenstein, even smart folks, by describing it as some horrifying monster." In Edith Wharton's The Reef from 1916, they even describe an unruly child as an infant Frankenstein. And there was a mention of the maker of poor Frankenstein in David Lindsay's The Bridal Ornament from June 1844. But after James Whale's Frankenstein hit the screens, the public started calling the creature itself Frankenstein. This mix-up carried on through the successful sequel Bride of Frankenstein in 1935, and even in film titles like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. So, in Mary Shelley's original movie, the monster doesn't actually get a name, but when he's talking to his maker, Victor Frankenstein, he drops a line like, "I should be your Adam." You know, like the first dude in the Bible. As for Frankenstein, he calls his creature all sorts of things like creature, fiend, specter, the demon, wretch, devil, thing, being, and even ogre. Oh, and the folks in Hamlet who saw the creature at the end of the story also went with monster. Now, Mary Shelley claims she got the name Frankenstein from a dream vision, but scholars have debated this over the years and suggested other sources of inspiration. You've got the German name Frankenstein, which means stone of the Franks, linked to various places in Germany, like Frankenstein Castle in Darmstadt-Hesse, and another one in Frankenstein, a town in the Palatinate. There's also a castle named Frankenstein in Bad Salzguden, Thuringia, and a town called Frankenstein in Saxony. There's a whole historical scandal involving gravediggers in the town of Frankenstein in Silesia, now Zabakwise, Poland, in 1606, which some say would have influenced the author. And to top it off, there's even an aristocratic house of Frankenstein in Franconia. Radu Florescu believed that Mary and Percy Shelley made a stop at Frankenstein Castle near Darmstadt in 1814. This is where alchemist John Conrad Dippel had dabbled with human experiments. Florescu's theory suggests that Mary chose to keep this visit hush-hush to uphold her reputation as the original creator of the Frankenstein story. In a literary essay by A.J. Day, the argument is made in support of Florescu's perspective. Day even brings up Mary Shelley's lost journals, which supposedly contain a description of the Frankenstein castle. Nevertheless, George Helene is skeptical and asserts that Day's and Florescu's claims remain unverified. You can think of the name Victor as a nod to John Milton's Paradise Lost, a book that greatly influenced Mary Shelley. She even quotes from it on the first page of Frankenstein and mentions the monster reading it in the novel. In Paradise Lost, Milton refers to God as the victor, and the act of Victor creating life in the novel can be likened to God's creation of life in Paradise Lost. Additionally, Shelley's portrayal of the monster takes inspiration from the character of Satan in Paradise Lost. In the story, the monster even mentions that he empathizes with Satan's role after reading the epic poem. Most people have noticed some interesting similarities between Victor Frankenstein and Mary Shelley's husband, Percy Shelley. Percy was the eldest child of a wealthy country squire, with strong political connections and some pretty prestigious ancestors, including Sir Bysshe Shelley, 1st Baronet of Castle Goring, and Richard Fitzlin, 10th Earl of Arundel. Victor's family, on the other hand, is also quite distinguished in the story, with ancestors who were counselors and syndics. What's even more intriguing is that both Percy and Victor had sisters named Elizabeth. And the connections don't stop there. Percy used Victor as a pen name for his work in Original Poetry by Victor and Kazir, a poetry collection he co-wrote with Elizabeth. During his days at Eton, Percy dabbled in various scientific experiments, including electricity, magnetism, gunpowder, and chemistry, much like Victor's pursuits in the novel. Even Percy's Oxford rooms were decked out with scientific gear, echoing Victor's passion for science. So, when Shelley described Frankenstein's monster, she painted a picture of an 8-foot-tall or 2.4-meter being with some pretty jarring contradictions. His limbs were all in proportion, and I had chosen the features to be beautiful. Beautiful! But oh my God, his yellow skin barely covered the muscles and arteries underneath. He had lustrous black hair with pearly white teeth, but those luxuries only made a more horrifying contrast with his watery, almost colorless eyes, his shriveled complexion, and his straight black lips. In the 1831 edition of the book, there was even a picture of the creature. In earlier stage portrayals, he was often dressed in a toga and had a pale blue complexion. Artists throughout the 19th century had their own take on how to depict the monster. As Shelley envisioned it, the creature is actually quite sensitive and emotional, with a deep desire to connect with another sentient being like himself. In the novel, we see him reading books like Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Lives, and The Sorrows of Young Werther, after learning language, showing a more complex and intellectual side to him. Right from the get-go, the poor creature gets the cold shoulder from everyone he encounters. He quickly figures out that even his own creator can't stand to look at him. It's pretty evident when Frankenstein says, "One hand was stretched out seemingly to detain me, but I escaped." This was in chapter 5. And when he catches a glimpse of himself, he's not too thrilled with his own appearance either. All he really wants is some love and acceptance. But when he's denied that, he goes all "I'm gonna get revenge on my creator" mode. Here's an interesting tidbit. The creature's actually a vegetarian. When talking to Frankenstein, he says, "My food is not that of man. I do not destroy the lamb and the kid to glut my appetite. Acorns and berries afford me sufficient nourishment. The picture I present to you is peaceful and human." But when the novel was written, there was a bunch of writers like Percy Shelley in A Vindication of Natural Diet, arguing that vegetarianism was the morally right thing to do. In the novel, unlike in many movie versions, the creature is quite the talker. Right after coming to life, he even manages to dress himself. Within just 11 months, he's reading and speaking German and French like a pro, and by the end of the story, he's got English down pat too. Now, when it comes to the Van Helsing and Penny Dreadful interpretations, they stay pretty close to the book's character in terms of personality, although the latter one is the only version that keeps the creature's fiery reactions to rejection. In that 1931 film adaptation, they make the creature mute and beastly, suggesting he got a bad brain transplant. But in the sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, he learns to talk, though it's a bit stilted. You can tell he's got a worldly perspective on life and deep understanding of his unnatural existence from what little he says. When his bride rejects him, he goes through a tough time and tries to take himself out by blowing up the lab. In Son of Frankenstein, he's back to being a man of few words. Then, in The Ghost of Frankenstein, they give him a brain transplant and he starts talking like the donor. They toyed with the idea in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, but they decided to cut his lines before release. After that, he's pretty much mute in the later sequels, though he does call Count Dracula his master in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. And yeah, the whole fear of fire thing is mostly a movie invention. In the novel, he's not afraid to use fire to end his own existence. So when it comes to Victor Frankenstein's death, there are a bunch of different theories floating around. Some folks think the monster indirectly did him in, while others believe Victor brought it on himself. Thing is, in Mary Shelley's book, she doesn't spell it out for us. At the end of Frankenstein, Victor dies on a boat in the cold Arctic, and the captain, Walton, finds him there with the sad monster. The monster decides to leave the boat and end his own life. So both Victor and the monster die, but they go in different ways. At the end of the story, Victor Frankenstein dies still wanting to get rid of the monster he made. The monster comes to see Victor's dead body and tells Walton he's really sorry for the bad things he did, and he's planning to end his own life. It's like Victor didn't really learn anything from his wild journey because he can't let go of his monster grudge. From the start to the end, Frankenstein is all about creating the monster, and at the end, he's still trying to get rid of him. He keeps making mistakes that led to his death. Here's the twist. The monster actually learns a lot throughout the story. He gets rid of his anger, jealousy, and desire for revenge. He feels bad about what he's done. While Victor's worried that the monster is still alive, the monster is okay with the idea of dying. He even thinks about doing it himself. This shows that having a friend is really important to him. Without Victor, he's all alone, and he thinks there's no point in living without a buddy. The whole story is all about how Victor's choices shake up not just his life, but also the likes of his folks, his mom, dad, and Elizabeth. And let's not forget, the monster he created is a major player in this drama, affecting all sorts of lives. Mary Shelley's novel has this sneaky underlying theme. It's all about life's little ironies. The way the main character meets his end shines a light on that irony, showing us that our past actions have a funny way of catching up with us. Mistakes we made way back when can come back to haunt our present and future, not getting away from it. That's all for today's spine-tingling tale. Frankenstein was a groundbreaking work of Gothic fiction that has captivated readers for generations. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.